and welcome to the CFB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and joined as always by my co-host and partner in crime, Jay Kuchek. We are breaking down all of this week's action from a main slate perspective, talking about DraftKings, FanDuel, PrizePicks, and a little prop betting at that. We are going to be answering any questions that you may have, breaking down each game in a game-by-game format, and just overall giving you some data and hot takes to get you through the rest of this week and have a profitable and fun rest of your weekend. Last week was pretty solid. Ended up quite well on a lot of our plays. Haven't been playing a whole ton this week. I've been playing, but not grinding out too hard on these short slates. Just kind of been doing my thing on the CFB side of things. But Jake, last week went pretty well for the most part. I feel like we're starting to hit our rhythm. Feel positive for this week. How did you do, and kind of what's your vibes for week 9?
Yeah, man, it was a good, I would say, good to above average week. For me, started out pretty slick with the 2 touchdown game out of Nick Anderson from Oklahoma. Liked that, and didn't quite carry that momentum throughout the rest of the day. Didn't have enough Ollie Gordon paired with him. Second coming of Jesus, Ollie Gordon, barely. But overall, pretty good week. Not just on Maine, but kind of across all slates. So feeling pretty comfortable to get back into it for another go round. Last slate of October. It's we're really in the mix of things and heading towards CFP and bowl season and all that. So yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, and the big thing for last week, Saturday morning, there was just a crazy amount of news, injuries, guys out, guys in. So really a lot of stuff that we had to kind of take care of on the pre-lock show. And there was some very big edge there with a guy like Gavin Sawchuk, who ended up taking the reins there as a starter. Had a terrible first drive, but he was lower owned, ended up scoring a touchdown, and just kind of like process-wise, that kind of play was a really big edge compared to the rest of the field that was a little bit behind. So I was happy with the way it really ended up turning out. Could have been a whole hell of a lot better, but does show you that the last minute injury news that we provide and process with you guys is definitely going to be helpful the rest of the way.
That first Sawchuk drive, you hit the nail on the head. It was like, ooh, fumble and then a loss and then missed
drop pass.
Dropped a pass. It was like, Come on, man, trifecta. You gotta do better than that. I'm giving you an opportunity. But yeah, no, he balled out in the end, so he'd end up okay.
For sure. All right, so we're gonna jump right in here. Florida State versus Wake Forest is gonna start us off. A total of 52. Florida State, big favorites, almost 21 points. One big difference between this week and last is there's a lot of kind of like mid-tier scoring games. There are a few over 60, definitely, but far less kind of video game-esque matchups on this particular slate. There are a few, but a little bit more of a grinder slate at times too. So I think this one's going to be quite interesting, starting off with your breakdown of Florida State and Wake Forest.
Yeah, so Florida State 3 touchdown favorite in this one, so pretty one-sided. It is at Wake, so maybe the Deeks can show a little bit of fight, but we also don't necessarily have a fully healthy quarterback on that side of things, so that could make it tough for him. Anytime you have a 3 touchdown favorite, it's kind of like, well, if they have a reasonably priced quarterback, he'll probably be able to do what he wants, especially if there's talent. I have no doubt that Jordan Travis will be able to do whatever he wants as long as the ball is still in his hands. And we haven't talked about like Jordan Travis as a Heisman candidate really. But if he continues the level of play and kind of gets a little bit more usage throughout this last quarter of the season here, we might start to hear a little bit about that, and we might see him staying in blowout style games longer. That said, he's up there, 4th most expensive quarterback on the slate in terms of guys you would actually play. And so that's not necessarily a situation I would go out of my way to use Jordan Travis outside of builds where you're expecting Wake to kind of keep pace and see it being high scoring. But think we've seen Florida State's defense show up enough times that I think they're going to roll pretty easily here. I would have more interest in the running backs, especially, we don't have an overwhelming price on Trey Benson just because he's kind of not shown up in some big spots. And then, he's had some blow up games a couple of times. So it is more of a volatile look and a volatile game and playing style that you're going to get out of Trey Benson, primarily in terms of his usage. Like we're not going to see a 20 touch game out of him, but when he does break a long run, then you don't need a 20 touch game out of him. So at 6,800, he's again by no means a lock, but I'm still a little bit more interested in him there than I am in Travis just because of the pricing. And then the guy that's really appealing is Toafili, who gets even fewer touches, but seems to fall into the end zone on a lot of those touches. Only 3 touchdowns so far this season, but that usage is there, and he seems to get a little bit of passing work as well. Had 4 catches against Duke last week, so haven't seen him do that other than in this game in terms of that level of volume. But if he stays involved against Wake, or additionally kind of picks up some of the garbage time work, if we expect there to be some of that, if there were a time to get a little bit excited about a Toafili at 4,100, that might be now. And then in the receiver room, you can always play Keon Coleman. I won't tell anyone to ever not play Keon Coleman. At 7K, you're going to need 8 catches for 100 some odd yards and a touchdown to pay that off. Very much within his range of outcomes to do that, but he's only really had that mega game a couple times this year. Obviously the first game against LSU, we haven't seen anything close to that since. Had a pretty good game against Syracuse, got there on volume, only had the 1 touchdown. It's again a marginal play. It's not a guy I'm forcing in. If we get a Johnny Wilson is definitely out kind of thing, Keon Coleman becomes a little bit more interesting, but not as interesting as Jaheim Bell. That's your guy. Brand favorite Jaheim Bell. Lot of volume against Duke, not necessarily a ton of efficiency. 8 catches for 53 yards. We probably would want to see him be a little bit more efficient and explosive than that, but you are going to probably continue to see that volume, especially if there's no Johnny Wilson. And he, unlike Keon Coleman, will only cost you the 4,200. So if we actually get Jaheim Bell in the end zone too, which we haven't seen in quite some time, I think we could do pretty well at that 4,200, and that's been kind of a sweet spot for us as far as receivers go. On the other side of things, not at all interested in the Wake Forest side. We don't have clarity on quarterback. It doesn't matter. They're all pretty bad anyway, and they're going up against a good defense. You can attack Florida State in the running game a little bit, but you tend to not do that when you're down by 3 scores. And I don't know that the offensive line for Wake is going to be able to survive. We did have a pretty impressive game out of Devon Claiborne last week against Pitt, and I don't think that we see anywhere near that same kind of performance. So 4,800, I think, if you're box score watching, I think people might gravitate towards that. Oh, okay, maybe this is the guy now. Justice Ellison's taking a back seat, and we're going to get, a whole bunch of efficiency in a multiple touchdown game. I don't think that's happening against the Florida State defense, and I don't think that there's going to be the volume to get any Wake rusher there, regardless of who you think is coming out of that backfield as the lead dog. So, and then I want no part of the passing game. So marginal pieces of all of Benson, Toafili, Coleman, and Bell, probably off Jordan Travis, just because I really value my quarterback spots this week, and I have some other places I want to go with that. But I have no problem taking secondary or even tertiary parts of the Florida State skill positions.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I like the Keon Coleman props this week. I think that's where I'm going to get a lot of my exposure to him. And then I am definitely considering Jaheim Bell. There's a couple of other banged up receivers in this FSU receiver room. Only 4-2 there on DraftKings. Definitely a guy I'm looking at as a heavily targeted, not getting the carries anymore, but definitely a guy I think that will finally find the end zone and is well worth that salary savings there as a main team play. I think he's pretty safe. All right, moving on to the next game here. We have Houston versus Kansas State, a total of 60. Kansas State 17.5-point favorites. I think this one has a good chance to go over. Houston's defense, they're giving up over 30 points a game to their opponents, well over 400 yards of total offense. They're a very, very easy team to score on. They do well offensively as well, push the tempo a bit. So there's definitely going to be some fantasy goodness here. I do want to start with the Kansas State side of things. Right now, Will Howard is going to, be the guy. There's conflicting reports that the reason Avery Johnson is getting this push is they want Will Howard to kind of pull his head out of his you-know-what. But then there's another conglomerate of people that feel like Avery Johnson is, ready to take the reins over. I do think it's going to kind of muddy the waters for both and that they're going to both continue to play regardless. And Avery Johnson's he's been so good as a runner and a dual threat that he's just going to continue to come in there kind of CFL style. CFL teams are notorious for bringing in a backup QB, especially in the red zone and stealing touchdowns. And obviously he's not going to do anything like the 5 rushing touchdowns he had against Texas Tech, but he's a clear weapon for this team that they're going to continue to utilize. And when he's 7-7, wasting a QB spot's kind of tough as he's not going to get all that volume. And Will Howard's just priced up enough to where it's hard to get him too. And it's a damn shame because if we had a one quarterback for sure, Will Howard doesn't have to worry about Avery Johnson. He'd actually be probably one of the top quarterbacks in the slate because, again, this Houston defense is just a sieve, and there's going to be a lot of points scored here. So instead, we can look to the running backs and possibly even the wide receivers. Running backs, I think it's going to be a somewhat popular week for Treshaun Ward, only at 5'8", has scored double-digit fantasy points in pretty much every game. His volume has taken a nice step up, and he's scoring touchdowns. He has a lot of touchdown equity, honestly. He earlier in the season, I know he only has the 4 total, but he's somebody who's going to find the end zone here. Giddens was getting a lot of the work, kind of the Deuce Vaughn-looking game that he had with the 2 catches, 75 yards against TCU. Definitely a good play at 6'5", the GPP style play, because I do think Ward's going to be a lot higher owned. But I do like the discount with Ward as well. You can't really go wrong with either. Houston's rush defense is fairly bad. I think they're 94th in rushing defense, and both are solid looks. Where it gets interesting for me is with the receivers, though. Last week, in the tight end, Ben Sano, who last week went out with a ankle injury very early in the game. There were some other guys who emerged there I thought we might be able to look at, like a guy like Will Swanson, who did score a touchdown, but with Sano now probable and likely playing, he's not really a look. There are still injuries to guys like Keegan Johnson, who's considered a game-time decision, and same thing with RJ Garcia. Depending on how that shakes out, we have our first real main team viable by just me, and the masses are going to overlook receiver from a purple team. You may remember in years past, I've tried to find these. They happen to be from a purple jersey team, low-owned, cheap receivers. And Jace Brown is going to be that guy for us this week, sitting there at 3.9. Heavily chasing, yes, because he did catch 4 passes for 88 yards and a score last week. But the opportunity is going to be there for him. He's a youngster, and those guys being banged up just gives more opportunity for Brown. He's a legitimate deep threat, somebody who I think can give this Houston secondary a lot of problems. If it comes out that Garcia and Johnson end up playing, that does, hurt that play a lot, but he's only 3.9. So certainly worth some of your GP lineups that you build out there. May we have enough testicular fortitude to pull the trigger? I know I will, but a lot of people probably will kind of be leery of that one. Certainly not a safe play by any means, but depending how that news shakes out, I think there's a lot of upside there for a player like Chase Brown, because again, I see Kansas State probably putting up somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 45 points. They put a hell of a number on TCU last week. I thought that was going to be a lot closer than it was, and this Kansas State team I think is going to continue to roll. On the other side there for Houston, the receivers continues to be Sam Brown, Matthew Golden, and Joe Manjack. All three have over 48 targets, majority of the passing volume going their way. You look at last week's game, Brown caught 4 of his 8 targets for 80 yards, Manjack 6 of his 9 for 88 and a touchdown, Golden 7 of his 9 for 88 and 2 touchdowns. Just like super even among all three. Ridiculously close. So in that regard, if you're going to use somebody from Houston and they're going to be that close in production, you generally want to just go with the cheapest one you can find. That to me is Manjack, obviously at 5'7". I think people would tend to go more towards Brown because he is technically the alpha WR1, and then Golden being the most expensive, likely GBP play. Manjack's really developed into a pretty solid pass catcher and somebody that's reliable. I do worry about the Kansas State defense, especially after how they stifled TCU so hard. So I'm not really looking to utilize any of these Houston guys in my main lineup, but they're certainly worth game stacking in GBPs and otherwise. I don't like the Houston running backs right now. Parker Jenkins was getting a little bit of work there. Tony Mathis, Stacy Snead is there at 4-5, but they're just all cannibalizing each other. And then you have Donovan Smith, who still takes some rushing yardage away from those guys. But he's going to be hard-pressed, I think, to kind of perform in this matchup. I have some real concerns about Houston here against this K-State team, and I'm just kind of probably more high on the Wildcats than I should be, especially if I'm going to be using 2 of their guys in my main lineup like it seems I'm going to be doing. What do you think, man? Are you kind of involved in this one, or are you just like, hey, there's 2 quarterbacks, I think that's going to affect the way that this is played, I don't think I want any part of it, or hey, purple people eater play of the day, let's go, let's run some Jace?
So I do like the Jace Brown call a lot, primarily because he was involved early in the game. Like usually you see a true freshman get involved, look at the box score, you say, okay, yeah, he had 1 long play. He only had 4 catches. He didn't have a ton of volume. He's probably doing it all in garbage time. No, he actually was involved on the second drive of the game, right? And so there definitely is the I guess they're trying to get him involved, right? He did kind of connect more with Avery Johnson than Will Howard. And so if we see that there's more Avery Johnson, I would probably be a little bit more likely to play him, but it seems like they're trying to get him involved regardless, right? So I like that call a lot. I probably, would be more likely to swing with Giddens out of the gate than Sean Ward. It just seems like Giddens' volume is a little bit more secure, even though there is a discount to go down to it. So I mean, Giddens was probably pretty high up there on my list, honestly, of running backs that I would want to utilize. And most of my interest does lie on the K-State side. It is, the Houston passing game can be electric at times. And it's a little tough to commit to any one of those guys since there's moderate, not great pricing on all of them, like you said. But I think in a game stack, I would certainly obviously need to have involvement in the passing game. But probably looking to Sam Brown or Manjack, just because of the pricing, and Manjack seems to have the most consistency out of the 3. But yeah, I think I like Brown the most out of all of those calls, to be honest.
Yeah, and looking at the snaps for last week, obviously there were some guys who went out with injuries, Keegan and Sano, but Jace Brown was 3rd in snap percentage at 61%. And I think that, there's a lot of hype around. I read a lot of message boards in Kansas State. People think that he's going to definitely take off. So I just want to be early on a play like that, but we might have to temper our expectations to a degree on that one. All right, moving on to Indiana versus Penn State. Penn State 32-point favorites on a 46 total. That is dreadful for the Hoosiers. Penn State, man, I'm waiting for these running backs to just blow up a slate. It really hasn't happened just yet. Might this be the time or the place and the game for that to happen finally?
It might be, but I think that it is Bill Drew Aller's confidence week at Penn State. Home game, coming off the loss against Ohio State, a still undefeated Ohio State team. and it was not one of Drew Aller's better games. This has every opportunity to be that. Indiana can't stop much, but they are a little bit better at stopping the pass, or they're at least a little bit better at falling so far behind that teams no longer need the pass. And I think that's really more of where their, moderately okay pass defense rating comes from is that teams just kind of stop doing it. So yes, I think there will be enough for both Singleton and Allen to have decent games and eat. And we might see something where like Singleton pops a kick return for a touchdown if he's still doing that, or has like a 60-yard run for a touchdown early, and we're kicking ourselves for not having more Singleton exposure. But I also think that this is going to be a big game from a psychological perspective to get, Drew Aller pumped up and, get his confidence back for the rest of the season. And there is no better team to do that against than Indiana when they're at home. So what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm using Drew Aller? Maybe. But it probably means more that I'm going to find looks that I like from the Penn State receiver room. The obvious version of that, Keandre Lambert-Smith, he's had a couple blow-up games so far, one against Iowa, which you don't see frequently, another against West Virginia, which you do see a little bit more frequently. But outside of those two, it's, either been blowout spots where they didn't really need him, or, just not a ton of efficiency overall for the passing game. And there's every opportunity for the every once and again Keandre Lambert-Smith blow up spot to happen. I'm very much in on him at 6-1. If you want to pair him with Aller, you can do so. I'm not forcing that combo. I think there'll be some long explosive plays, possibly resulting in touchdowns for Lambert-Smith. I don't know that we're going to have like a 400-yard passing game for Aller, but he's going to look to his number one target, and I don't see Indiana having anyone that can stop him. If you're looking for a little bit of a discount, but still exposure to the passing game, you can go with Theo Johnson, pretty athletic tight end, that has been in the program for a while, and guy that Aller's obviously comfortable with at this point. Haven't seen a ton from Harrison Wallace just yet. This could be another spot where he gets involved. Been injured for a while, but back at it the last couple weeks with not a ton of volume. Didn't do very much against Ohio State. I doubt anyone will be on him at 5,300, but that's another look if you are omitting Keandre Lambert-Smith in your builds. And then Tyler Warren is kind of their red zone guy. They use him in a similar way to Oklahoma has been using Nick Anderson up until this past week, when Nick Anderson was kind of put into a starting role, but as the guy that only catches touchdowns. So 17 catches on the season, 5 of which have gone for touchdowns for Tyler Warren. They'd really like him in the red zone. Another guy that struggled against Ohio State, probably will not struggle here. That's already a good amount of their pass catchers, so we don't need to get too far, off the radar other than that. But those are enough guys to get involved. If you want to go the direction of using Aller just because you're buying into that thesis that they're going to try to build his confidence up, certainly not going to dissuade you from doing so. Indiana's pass defense is pretty terrible. So, at the 8K price tag, probably needs, 303, the old Sam Hartman at Wake Forest line that we were so comfortable with. Very much doable. Hasn't been a thing that he's done with any consistency yet. In fact, only over 300 yards one time this year. So it's possible. It's just that, I think it's going to be pretty concentrated into Lambert-Smith. So, as far as the running backs go, I don't really have much of a lean. It's a tough running back room to figure out in terms of who's going to have more volume and or more efficiency. They're both pretty explosive. I would probably lean Katron Allen just because I think there's going to be a tendency to go to Singleton within the industry. So I think there will be a little bit lower ownership on Katron Allen, but we're not even really getting much of a discount at 5'9" versus 6'3". And we've seen less out of Katron Allen recently, but it might be the case that, once they're up by 3 or 4 scores, he's going to get the bulk of the work as opposed to Singleton. So if you want to get really off the radar and, think that they're going to score 6 times in the first half and all the starters are going to sit in the second half, and that we see a good amount of Trey Potts in the third and fourth quarters, that's a pretty off the radar, GPP look at 3,400, but very realistic path to a 8 to 10 carry game for Trey Potts, in which, you could see him go for 50 yards and a touchdown. Does that do it for you at 3-4? It's, I guess, fine if everyone else does well, but he's not going to get 20 carries. So you're not going to see the kind of volume that, like a Dallin Hayden got when we had a Chip Trayanum injury. You're not going to see anything like that with Trey Potts. So all of that to say, I definitely want exposure in varying degrees, probably most to Keandre Lambert-Smith, and then to Aller, and then to some combination of running backs. But yes, this is an a Penn State team that you want exposure to in some degree, however you think they're going to score. Indiana side, I'm just going to skip. Not going to have any interest in anyone, not even in a high volume Jalen Lucas game or a high volume Camper game. I think it's just going to be struggles across the board and a lot of time of possession for Penn State.
Definitely. And like I said, there's going to be a slate where these Penn State running backs absolutely detonate. This could definitely be the spot. I always like them in 32-point favorites. That's I could see them covering that, actually. I bet them like 41-point favorites against UMass. A little different opponent, but I like the betting side there for Penn State, and mostly agree. Yeah, they're going to be a very lower-owned team, but I like what you said about Aller and think that there's some definite upside there. All right, moving on to the next game here, Oklahoma versus Kansas. 9.5-point favorites are the Sooners, 66-point total. Starting with the Sooner side, Dylan Gabriel at 9.4 there on DraftKings. A little bit of not a lackluster game. I shouldn't say that. He did throw for 3 touchdowns, but 23.3 DK points, not quite what we're looking for there. He ended up being relatively highly owned. I went heavy on the running back situation, even though it was to begin the week, it was all, there's 4 of them. What can we do? By Saturday morning, it got a little more clarity. So I got away from having too much of him, still had a decent chunk. But still 38 pass attempts, comes into this one against a very favorable Kansas defense that he should be able to, 40 plus passing attempts again. The nice emergence there of your guy, Anderson, who, for weeks I've been saying, hey, this kid's got some definitive upside. He can break a slate, but the targets just aren't consistent, and he's been really efficient. He's catching all 3 of his passes for 120 yards. He's catching all 3 of his passes for 56 yards and a touchdown, but he was targeted 9 times, tied with Drake Stoops for the lead, caught 5 of those passes, 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. So looking like, finally with, we know Andrew Anthony is out for the year, but Nick Anderson could be stepping into a role where not only can he break the slate and take a long pass to the end zone, but he's getting targets, getting usage, getting a lot more work, which makes him further dangerous in that regard. And I think we see him kind of get, popped up there. He's 5'8" on DraftKings. Wouldn't shock me to see people notice that and kind of raise his ownership to a degree, somewhere between 10 to 15%, maybe even higher in single entry. So I'm on board with using him. I still like the running back situation here for Oklahoma. The matchup, at least, it's still a bunch of mouths to feed. But I can't argue that Nick Anderson is the play, more so than Drake Stoop, more so than Julio Farouk. I feel like at this point, Farouk's just getting kind of difficult to peg here. He was targeted 5 times in that last game, caught 3 of them for 23 yards. Obviously expected more from him. But with the way Anderson's playing and how steady Stoops has been, it doesn't leave necessarily a whole lot of consistent production there for Farouk. So I'm a little bit down on him right now, but it's a perfect GPP spot to go back to him because I do think others will be fading in droves and playing Nick Anderson. The running back situation is intriguing. Barnes is still, they were saying, oh, he might be ready, but it doesn't sound like he will be ready for this. The last game, Marcus Major was supposedly banged up to the point where he was going to be limited. But I guess limited meant 18 carries, which was the second most he's had all season. So their limited and our limited might not mean the same thing. But sitting there at 4.9, the big thing for this one is Tyree Walker, who was suspended last game. It came out that he was suspended, not hurt. Will be returning for this one and likely stepping into a kind of, 1A to 1B, role here with Marcus Major. That kind of drops Gavin Sawchuk back down. Ended up having that, it was a 30-yard touchdown run, which saved his day. Had 15.5 DK points at 4-1. People were still kind of mad. There was even someone on social media saying that we were slappies for playing him, which I still don't understand to this day because I'll take the starting running back against UCF any day at 4-1. Could have done better, obviously. Had a bad first drive, but I still like these Oklahoma running backs. And they step into a situation, while not as good as last week. UCF's rush defense is historically bad, but Kansas's rush defense is no elite juggernaut. They're giving up over 160 yards per game on the ground as well. And this is a spot where if you have a good read on, hey, I think Walker's going to get 15 to 20 carries, or I think Major's going to get 20 plus carries because he's limited now, then you want to play one of these guys because Walker's only 5'1", Major's only 4'9". To me, I would rather play those guys than Gabriel. I'm being kind of shysty at the quarterback position this week. I have one in particular that I'm like all in on. Nothing's going to change my mind. And I might be doing the 4 running back or possibly a wide receiver thing in the super flex. Probably not, but I'm only really looking at one quarterback that I'm like, yes, I have to play. And it's not Dylan Gabriel. And I'm looking at some early ownership projections, and Gabriel's trending towards being one of the third high, top 3 highest owned quarterbacks at the position or on the slate on DraftKings. And that doesn't necessarily surprise me, but it definitely makes me nervous because I'm a lot lower on him than I think majority of people will be. And it's not because I don't think he'll play well in this game. I just think there's an opportunity cost that at 9.4, I don't know that he's going to put up a 40. I think the running backs are going to do damage here, and I think it's going to be one of those games where Gabriel's surgical, yes, but he's going to score like 25 to 28 fantasy points, and I can find that for 1 to 2K cheaper and move along and try to get some other spots in there that some people won't be able to get if they're paying that 9.4 for Gabriel. So that's kind of the strategy that I'm employing there. The drama surrounding Jalen Daniels still going on. We're not, as of right now, he's doubtful, not expected to play. But how many times have we done this with Daniels? It's like, okay, he's out. Oh, now he's warming up. Now he's going to play. Oh, just kidding. He's not going to play. So thankfully, Oklahoma's defense is pretty damn stout. I know they just gave up a bunch of points to UCF, but they are pretty solid normally. And I don't want to feel like I have to force in one of those guys. Jason Bean showed us the upside. I won't talk smack about him because last time we were like, well, can't use Jason Bean. He put up a big number, 40 fantasy points against Oklahoma State. I do not expect him to do that this time against Oklahoma, but if he has passing volume over 30 attempts, certainly, has some GPP intrigue at 6-7, but definitely not a guy that I'm going to be looking at for my main lineup. The receiving core for Kansas remains dirt cheap. You can get any of them under 5K. However, the targets for this Kansas team tend to be pretty spread out. They have 4 different guys over 24, none of them over 30 targets. So nobody's really stepping out and being the alpha. And they all are sitting around 240 to 280 receiving yards as well. So you've just got a bunch of guys who are cannibalizing each other to the point where, yes, they're cheap, but they still might not pay off their price tag. Really, the only guy, there's 2 guys really, Hisha and Neal, that are ever interesting from a DFS perspective, but I don't particularly like this spot for either of them. Neal is our guy, one of the top brand plays normally, but he's 6'7", almost 7K there on DraftKings, and there's just some other running back spots that I feel like we need to utilize. Normally, if I like a guy a lot, I don't care about matchup. I'll just put my head down and I'll just keep plugging along with him and forcing him into my builds. But I am backing off of Devin Neal, and I think a lot of people are. which makes him an excellent GPP target because of the fact that he's trending to be sub 10% owned. And he could very well score 3 times in a game against anyone. It's just not a very good spot to target him this week because of that cost in the matchup. So I am lower on Devin Neal than normal, and that makes me feel a little bit depressed in a way. But I feel good about this, and I'm going to likely be using one of Major or Walker this week. Could blow up in my face, but the matchup, be damned, I think one of them is going to tear down this slate. What are you doing with Gabriel if you know he's chalk?
I was all about Gabriel last week. It's hard to get off of him at this point, other than it coming down to price. But he's just he's too good, and he's too close to solidifying kind of Heisman campaign and draft status and all that. Like, I think he's just going to kind of keep the foot on the gas. He's historically had some fantastic games against KU, and I think that continues. Pretty emotional win for him last week, so might see him start out a little bit flat, but I think that there's always upside with Dylan Gabriel. The price on him versus the price on the running backs is the thing that's giving me pause. Running backs are so much cheaper and give you just as good, if not better, exposure to Kansas's weaknesses. So I'm not getting away from him, but I'm not prioritizing him as much as I was at home against UCF last week.
Fair enough. All right, moving on to the Duke versus Louisville game. Another one in the mid-40s, right around 46. Got the Cards 4.5-point favorites. There are options on both sides, but defensively, Duke's been doing it lately, and there's some pause for me in this game where in the past it'd be like, wow, this game is going to be really fantasy friendly, and I'm not so sure this year if it is. So what do you think about this particular matchup?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a bummer that we don't have a fully healthy Riley Leonard. Like, this seems like a classic Riley Leonard goes off for like 150 yards and 4 rushing touchdowns kind of spot. But it's just not going to happen. Like, the health isn't there. He might not even play. And so this game kind of loses a lot of luster for that reason, for me anyway. And there's some appeal to the running game on both sides, but there's also kind of some split touches. Like, we see the 13 to 15 carries from Jordan Waters every week, but then Jaquez Moore got in there for a whole bunch of carries against Florida State, and some of that is game script related, but it's just not an obvious spot for either of them, and you're not getting a significant enough discount for me anyway to have a whole lot of interest in the running game on either side of this one. And then Duke's defense has been legit, but so is Jamari Thrash. I just and his price is there too, like at 6,100. Like, if you were to tell me on most weeks Jamari Thrash is 6,100, I'm all in. Why is he there? Why are we thinking about anybody else? I don't know that this is necessarily the spot. I don't know that there is going to be the kind of pace and volume for Louisville's offense, or Duke's offense for that matter, to get there. And I think this is going to be, a very antithetical to what most ACC games look like. I feel like this is going to have more of a Big Ten grinded out kind of feel, which is not how I would typically want to feel about Duke Louisville. But Thrash at that price is hard to get away from, right? And so, if I'm interested in anybody from the receiver room on Louisville, it's obviously going to be him. With all due respect to Amari Huggins-Bruce, who can show up at times and is only 3,900, and tends to make long splashy plays when he does make plays. But it's just it's not enough volume for me to want to get there. And then Jalen Calhoun, I guess you can dabble in, not not enough volume. Not somebody I'm looking to force into lineups by any means. If I'm in that price range, I'm probably and I'm sticking to this game for some reason. I probably want to find the extra 600 to get up to thrash. And not a whole lot exciting for me other than him on the Duke side and in the receiving room. And then with Plummer, I mean, Leonard, I'm not going to be interested in because of the lack of health, and Plummer going up against a tough defense, not a lot of explosiveness to his game anyway. Most of the explosiveness exists through thrash. So I think if I want exposure to this game, which I probably don't, it would be through thrash. That's kind of the only look that I'm really going for.
Yeah, I 100% agree. He's, can be considered matchup proof. He's been, double-digit fantasy points in all but one game, and certainly a exciting price there for him. For GPP purposes, definitely want to get exposure, but I'm pretty down on the game overall as well. All right, moving on to the next game here. We have West Virginia versus UCF. Got that UCF team on there. I was impressed that they were able to keep up and make that such a game against Oklahoma, because I really expected them to get their doors blown off. So kudos to them for keeping it close. Now they get a winnable matchup for them against West Virginia. They're 7-point favorites. The total's 58. I kind of alluded to, there's one quarterback on this slate that I'm locked and loaded on, and it is going to be the Garrett Green kid for West Virginia here. Now, he's not super cheap. We're not talking about a 6K quarterback. We're not talking about even a mid 7K. You would have to pay 8-1 if you go down this path, but the last 3 or 4 weeks he's been really solid, dangerous dual threat, and he's completing enough passes on the volume he's getting to be adequate there as well. 391 passing yards against Houston, followed that up with 250 against a tough Oklahoma State program. Completed just 15 passes there, but he was really throwing it downfield. Had a couple of touchdowns there. Also rushed for 117 yards. He's now got 350 rushing yards on the season, 5 rushing touchdowns, 8 passing touchdowns to 2 interceptions. Just really exciting play for me. Gets to go against this UCF team that we know we were so high on, Gabriel last week, and the running backs, once we got clarity, because this UCF team, they're giving up almost 200 yards per game on the ground. They've been better against the pass, but it's not like they're going to be completely shutting anyone down there. Green can mix it up anyways because he is such a threat with his legs. It's not like he's going to be out there generally throwing for 300 plus yards. Certainly proved himself capable, but I like him too. There's a couple props of his combined pass plus rushing yards on PrizePicks that I love. I think he's easily going to eclipse 300 plus combo yards in this one, and it's definitely my favorite quarterback on this particular slate. So I'm locking him in with pretty big confidence, and that could, kind of bite me in the ass as he's on the road and he still, can be a low floor play, but he's just looked so good this year, and he's got really good control of this offense, and they've really done a good job building it around him. Now, there is another situation here where, hey, there's running backs against UCF. What can we do? CJ Donaldson normally would be the, hey, he's the WR1. Let's get him in there. But, they did give Justin Johnson 14 carries in that Oklahoma State game, had 72 yards and a touchdown. When you look at the actual snaps played, Donaldson still had the most, but Johnson saw that spike, and I think that could potentially continue. Donaldson had the 13 carries, 39 yards, did still score a touchdown. He's actually scored a touchdown in all but one game back in week 2. So he's got a lot of equity in this offense, but his YPC has only been 3.9. He hasn't had the receptions that I expected him to either. He only had 7 catches for 50 yards. That's been a problem. Obviously, losing some yardage to a mobile quarterback like Green, but now he's got the Johnson kind of in there. If he's pilfering work, that might be a one-game blip, but if that's something that's going to continue, it makes it kind of hard, where 2 or 3 weeks ago I would have told you, yeah, we're playing Donaldson against UCF's rush defense, 100%, no doubt, and, I'm not even faltering. Now we're looking at it like, oh, shoot, we might have to kind of pull back here and get into this and read it a little bit more, because if Johnson's going to be pilfering that kind of work, he's probably main team viable at 3.9K. I am a little leery of it continuing, but we'll see. read some things that they're going to mix in both. But for me, I'm just going right to Green and going that route, which is kind of the opposite. I was heavy on Gabriel as well last week, ended up pulling away because we got clarity on the running back situation. But now I'm really kind of just like playing Green against UCF no matter what. Does have the big play threat. Hudson Clement likely out for this one. That definitely hurts. Clement's kind of, can take the back off of a secondary and get behind them with the quickness. We saw him with a damn near game-winning touchdown a few times and a game-winning touchdown drive. The play to look at if you want a pairing partner for Green, because most people do ask that, Devin Carter, likely the one you want to look at, sitting there at 5'1", 18 targets in the past 2 games. Turned that into 5 catches for 116 yards against Houston, 3 catches for 54 yards and a touchdown against Oklahoma State. I would have liked him to be a little cheaper. 5'1" to me, he's not the must play for any means, but I do think he'll see a little bit of ownership there because of this matchup being so good and the targets that he's been getting. They also can play Cole Taylor, who's pretty consistent as a PPR guy. Nothing exciting, but he is 4.5, and he is another pair that you could roll with Green. But for me, I'm perfectly happy and capable of running the naked Green and feeling very, very confident in it. On the UCF side, these receivers remain really cheap, especially on FanDuel, where you can probably have to play at least one. Javon Baker caught 5 passes for 134 yards, 2 touchdowns in the spot against Oklahoma, where I thought, yeah, he's going to take it's going to be a down game for him, and it wasn't. Certainly like him in this matchup. West Virginia, now I know that they typically their rush defense has been better than their pass defense. And obviously last week they went against, you had mentioned, Jesus himself and Ollie Gordon, who rushed for almost 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. But if you throw that game out, they've really been quite stout against the run, and you've been able to beat them with the pass game. So I do like the Baker-Hudson, duo there, kind of rotating through those options and feeling pretty good about it. Baker has 43 targets on the year, 61% catch rate, over 550 yards. Hudson, 24 catches, but he's also over 100 or 500 yards, 2 touchdowns for him. So he's been a big play threat for sure. And then Xavier Townsend coming in there with 33 targets, 20 catches, 200 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So this passing group here is certainly in a good spot against West Virginia. I do think people might get a little bit of tunnel vision and say, well, Ollie Gordon just tore this defense apart. We got to play RJ Harvey at 6'2", so I think he'll be relatively popular. He has rushed for 95-plus yards in 3 straight. Just went over 100-yard mark against Oklahoma last week, which was a bit of a surprise to me. The week before that against Kansas, that porous Kansas rush defense, 133 yards and a touchdown, and that was on 16 carries. Uber efficient there, 8.5 YPC. So I do like Harvey. I think he's fine. You can always get our guy Johnny Richardson in some GPPs. His snaps haven't gone down, but his touches have, so he's a little bit of a difficult play to use on the slate unless he was min price. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him get some action here. And if truly West Virginia's rush defense is demoralized after last week, then yeah, I could see Harvey coming in here and having a big game at 6'2". That might be the one that I'm the most worried about being underweight on, so I'll have to force in some ownership there on Harvey. But coming out of this game, I'm locked and loaded on Green with confidence. The other quarterback I'm really interested in is going to feel like a troll to you, but I love Green here. Am I kind of way out of whack, or do you feel like Green has this ability to continue putting up these big fantasy games for now?
Did I hear you mention John Bryce Plumlee once? I don't think you said his name. Oh my goodness! You got
to get through.
Got a 58 total touchdown spread. And JRP sitting there at 7,200, and Wald is not interested at all. Man, the disrespect. Look, Green is fantastic. This is the nut matchup for him. Obviously, it can very much blow up. And I'm not quite right there with you, but I do see a lot of pass to Green doing very, very well. I'm 100% in on Justin Johnson. The way that the coach speak has trended, The way that they've talked negatively about Donaldson and positively about Johnson all week, talking about how Johnson looked, exactly as he played in the game in practice, and they need to find ways to get him more work. Like, yes, it is coach speak, but then they showed up with the 14 carries in addition to the coach speak, and that was before last week, right? So I think he's going to be that play that is just, to most people, is going to see him out of nowhere. Oh my gosh, how come CJ Donaldson got 7 carries, right? And Justin Johnson got 20 and went for 150 and a touchdown, right? And so I could be very wrong with this, but I think this is going to be a high volume Justin Johnson game. And if you get that against UCF, you just at 3-9, you can't get away from it. It doesn't mean that Green can't also do well. I just, I'm more in on Johnson at 3-9 than I am on Green at a much higher price tag. And, obviously in taking a quarterback spot in doing so. And then JRP on the other side, man, if we like the UCF receivers as much as we do, even without JRP running it the way he normally does, he can still get there. I mean, he did kind of fall into the end zone once. We didn't see the dynamic 60+ rushing upside yard game against Oklahoma. That's obviously a pretty tough defense. West Virginia is not that way, and so I think we could see a pretty big game out of JRP as well, at probably reduced ownership, because we haven't seen the blow up games from him this year that we've seen in years past. So I like Baker a lot. One of Baker's touchdowns last week was on kind of a broken play, not really a broken play, it was like a triple option pass kind of play. So there was nobody within 30 yards of him, and so it's not correct to expect that to happen every time, but when you have a quarterback that can run like Plumlee, it does kind of open things up for those broken plays, quote unquote, to happen a little bit more often. So I love a Plumlee and Baker with a Johnson run back. If you want to add Green to that mix as well, I would be all for that too. It's kind of the way I'm seeing it.
All right, we're moving on to BYU versus Texas. 20-point favorites are the Longhorns. 50 total injuries to an important position for Texas. What are we doing with the Texas Longhorns without Quinn Ewers?
We're running the ball. I think we're going to be running the ball a lot in Austin. And good news is, against BYU, you can do that and not really have any problems. So Brooks's price has been pretty consistent, right? Like, he's been in that 7 to 7.5 range. It was 74 last week. And I don't know how he doesn't get 25 carries, right? If they're, breaking in somebody other than yours, are we even certain that it's going to be entirely one quarterback, or is there a potential that we could see, Arch Manning for the first time? Do we have a read on that scenario?
It sounds like Malik Murphy, but if he stumbles out the gate, there's going to be a lot of pressure.
People are going to say, hold on a minute, that guy just threw 2 interceptions. We have
exactly.
Pretty famous guy sitting on the sideline, right? So I don't think that Malik Murphy is going to have a chance to fail, right? I think they're probably going to throw like a couple 3-yard outs and, a couple screen passes and some swing passes and really just pepper underneath targets, but they're going to do that in a complementary fashion to pounding Jonathan Brooks 25 to 30 times. So I'm way in on Jonathan Brooks, even though, he is one of the more expensive running backs on the slate. But if I'm pairing him with a Johnson at 3.9, I can afford to do that, right? And so there's just going to be so much volume available for him and also for Baxter. If you want to go the discount route, go extremely double discount with Johnson and somebody like Baxter at 4.2. I think Baxter is going to be involved as well, not because he's going to take a larger share of the overall rushing attempts than he otherwise would. But because there will be so many more rushing attempts than typical, and also he's been involved in the passing game, and I think there's going to be a lot of those short passes, like I mentioned. So I really do like both Brooks and Baxter. Because of the uncertainty at quarterback, I'm probably not going to be getting to, like a Xavier Worthy at 6'8". Even though the way to attack BYU is typically, with the vertical passing game, and can usually be effective. I think that's not really what they're going to attempt to do. And there may be some bad tackling that leads to long plays. So, Worthy might be able to navigate his way through a secondary on a slant or something. But I don't think we're going to see a ton of deep shots. AD Mitchell hasn't really showed up in the way that he did against anyone but Kansas recently. Whittington has seen volume precisely one time against Oklahoma. And that was with, Jatavian Sanders going down with injury, and Sanders didn't really come back with a vengeance against Houston. So if you were to go with anybody in the passing game, obviously Worthy has been the dude that has had the most consistency, but his ceiling is so much lower. His floor is probably relatively the same because he can still break long yak type plays, but I'm not super interested in anything but the running game with the exposure to Brooks and Baxter. And then on the BYU side, I was thinking that quarterback you were talking about was Keaton Slovis. Was that who you're saying was your quarterback you're all in on this week?
No, Green. It's Green, and then I like another guy, but no,
Okay.
not Slovis.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's actually. I don't think it's actually Keaton Slovis. He's looked, marginally competent against like Texas Tech, but no, he's had it rough. And this is a tough defense for him to be going up against. LJ Martin has been pretty consistently getting double-digit carries and gets some work in the passing game, but this is not the matchup for him by any means. And then the receiver room, we've been on Chase Roberts a lot and it's worked out. He's done well for us. Didn't do quite as much in terms of volume against Texas Tech last week, but he did get in the end zone pretty early. We've seen some stuff out of Darius Lassiter lately. He had 4 catches for 47 yards and touchdown. Again, against Texas Tech, but we're not really getting the requisite discount. Like I would want to see him in the 3s before I would be interested in playing him against Texas. I just, I do know that BYU is probably going to be chasing some points and probably going to be throwing the ball a good amount. So the theory of going after some BYU receivers makes sense. In practice, Keaton Slovis is pretty terrible. And so it's not a defense that I like, attacking him with. So hard to get there as a run back. But if I limit my exposure to this game to one or probably not both in the same lineup, but both overall, one or both of Baxter or Brooks, I think we're looking pretty good there.
Yeah, and speaking of Chase Roberts, I got a little bit lucky because I had to disappear. Usually after main slate, I got to do stuff with this family that I got, and so I didn't see that Chase Roberts wasn't starting. So I still played him, and he scored that touchdown. I know that kind of hurt the Discord there because of the overreaction, but yeah, this BYU team is real bad, and I think my guy Slovis is going to struggle mightily, but I like the Baxter call there, man. I really want to use CJ Baxter, but feel like I don't want to get too cute either because the slate's turning into looking like a bit chalky to me, and I don't want to miss out on a giant Brooks game at 70% owned or whatever silly percentage he's going to be.
It kind of seems like it's a game the defense will control, and Brooks will get his touches certainly once he gets up to that like 20 to 22 level of touches and they're up by 3 scores. I think we might see a lot of Baxter. And I think he has, just the same amount of upside in the touches that he does get. So it might, instead of it being like 27 touches for Brooks and 6 or 8 for Baxter, it could be closer to like 22 and 10 in terms of the split. And there's obviously a pretty large price differential, right? So it's kind of just dependent on your build, which one you have room for. And I do like both of them.
And it's easy to forget. I mean, I might be one of the few, but coming into week one, like I was, CJ Baxter, this kid's amazing.
We were more on Baxter.
Yeah. I was personally way higher on Baxter. So I love it if he can get some more touches and kind of prove himself. All right, Texas A&M versus South Carolina. 15.5-point favorites are the Aggies, 52.5 total. This is the game, man. Texas A&M, South Carolina, this is going to go over that total. I feel pretty confident in that. South Carolina, an absolute pass funnel. They're giving up over 300 passing yards per game. That means we do have to consider the way I love Slovis is the way you love Max Johnson. And I feel like at 6'5", we got to give him some serious consideration. Against Tennessee in week 7, 34 pass attempts. Now, he only completed 16 of them. I don't want to harp on that too much. I want to talk about that volume, 34 passes. And I think we're going to see a good opportunity for him to throw, 35 to 40, because I do think South Carolina will score some points here as well. There is a little bit of not lately because he's been taking sacks, a little bit of rushing upside for Max Johnson. And I know people look at his logs and be like, man, this guy's horrible. What do you mean? But this is a game where he absolutely can take advantage. He's got a receiver room of quality guys who have struggled lately, but he can absolutely pan out with, Evan Stewart, whose price has come down to 5'8", Anaya Smith, who is, a big time target snap, plays a lot of snaps on the field, a lot all over the field. And these are relatively cheap prices. So perhaps more responsible to recommend these guys for GPPs, but they're very, very cheap and it makes a lot of sense. Evan Stewart was, just last week over 7K. Now we're getting this steep discount down to 5.8 because he started out the season with, back-to-back 110 plus yards, a couple of touchdowns, and that really jacked his price way up, and it's taken this long to come back down. But this is a very good buy low opportunity for him against his South Carolina secondary, which they're very young and inexperienced, and they just continue to get pelted week after week after week. So it's the Aggies' turn, and using one of these guys makes just way too much sense to me. If you really want to go off the board, Moose Muhammad sitting there at 4.5. It's not cheap enough, honestly, to really justify playing him. If he were 3.5, we'd really be talking. But don't be surprised if he catches a long ball and puts up like a 375 and 1 touchdown type of stat line at 2%. I really, really am a fan of this Aggies team this week. And I found myself liking them more and more this season, even though I have no allegiance to them whatsoever. Really like Lev Moss. The volume's still there, only 5'2". I know against Tennessee coming into that one, I was really high on him. He didn't pan out for us. Only 9 fantasy points, did get a reception and still got 16 touches. So that workload was still there. Unfortunately, the Aggies only scored 13 points against a very bad Tennessee team. This is a much easier matchup even than them. And I think we could see Moss kind of bounce back and have somewhere between 18 and 20 fantasy points, and probably see somewhere between 18 to 20 touches as well. 100-yard rushing game seems like a good possibility, even though the Aggies are going to throw a lot. And Moss does catch some passes too, but I think he's really cheap at 5.2 and should be considered a potential main team viable type of play. Much more responsible than using Max Johnson. On the South Carolina side, you have Spencer Rattler, who's 7.3. He had that great game against Florida and kind of came back down to earth against Missouri. But one thing I can tell you is there's going to be a ton of passing volume for him as well. Looking at probably 40, 42 type, pass attempts. So that kind of volume, he's bound to score some points. How many remains to be seen. He hasn't had Juice Wells at all, pretty much, just a handful of snaps back in week 3 and week 2. Now, the man that stepped up for him, Xavier Legette, is dealing with a upper body injury, and he's considered questionable. So, full on disaster here for the South Carolina passing game. And even Amarian Brown, who had been stepping up a little bit for Juice Williams, now he's dealing with a hamstring issue that's going to cost him this game. So somebody else is going to have to step up on these pass attempts. There is the Eddie Lewis kid who transferred in from Memphis, did nothing last week, but early in the season, he had a 6-catch for 89-yard game. He had some pretty nice games for Memphis, somebody to possibly look at. And then Trey Knox sitting there at 4K. He's probably the best / sneakiest option on the slate for, I think at 4K, he makes a lot of sense, even for a main team. All of these guys are out, and we could theoretically see him be targeted 10, 12, 13, maybe even 15 times if Xavier Legette ends up out of this game. If you look back and see some of his past games, 7 catches for 51 yards, 8 catches for 50 yards, it's not really that exciting, but at 4K, that PPR work really starts to add up in a hurry. And Knox is now second on the team in targets because of all these injuries. And you look at his week-to-week target share, 8, 5, 8, 8, 5. He's really involved even with those guys around. You take Legette and Marion Brown out of the mix, like that's going to double. I'm pretty confident. So Trey Knox, and he's a tight end, which is brand for FTN to have a cheap tight end kind of go off. So think Jatavian Sanders, but way less, but the volume about the same or even more. So I think Trey Knox could definitely pan out here for us in a good way. The South Carolina running backs, they don't befuddle me. I don't want to use that word about myself, but I don't know. Mario Anderson's been pretty good, I guess. He's only 4.7. I'm curious to see what kind of ownership that might generate. Dakarian Joyner, he's been, pretty decent in terms of YPC yardage. When he's involved, he's getting receptions. He's more the pass catching back, but at 5K, I don't really have a lot of interest in him. Then you had Juju McDowell, banged up, but he had a nice game against Florida with a passing or a receiving touchdown. He's been active as a pass catcher as well. He's there at 4.1. Just seems like there's a bunch of different guys getting touches here. So I don't want to pretend to say like, yeah, Mario Anderson's good. He's putting up all these stats. I just think that there is a opportunity for him to lose every touchdown after working, between the 20s and just getting robbed and still not paying off that 4.7. So that's one of those cheaper plays where I'm backing off, and I wonder if the industry is kind of utilizing him a little bit. But then I got to remember it's also South Carolina, and I don't think that even their own fans are using them in DFS right now. No offense to our South Carolina fan in the Discord. So that's where I'm at with this game. I feel pretty good about Texas A&M. I feel good about the total, and I think Trey Knox might be one of the sneakier options. If we go back to the Jace Brown call from K-State, for what it's worth, if the injury news breaks right, Trey Knox is actually my favorite value above him. So for what it's worth. Do you have any leans in this one, or you want to move on?
I know you mentioned that South Carolina's, a pass funnel, and that's kind of traditionally been true. Do want to just throw out there Cody Schrader, 26, 159, and 2 against them last week out of the backfield. So Lev Moss at 5.2 is going to be a high priority for me.
Love it.
A lot of volume and should have a lot of efficiency, and not ceding a whole lot of carries to like a 1B type back. So I really like Moss this week.
All right, we are going to move on to Georgia, the Brock Bowers list. Georgia, that is sad for me, versus Florida, a Florida team that has literally no identity and has trouble. 1 week they look really decent, and then other weeks they don't look good at all. They're 14.5-point dogs, a 49.5 total. I think Georgia has some interesting looks here, especially at the receiver spot. What are you doing with these two teams?
Yeah. So, no Brock Bowers, obviously that's tough. And when we first kind of talked about what life was going to look like, for Georgia, and I think in the Vandy game we were talking about it, and Brock Bowers was, I don't know, did he get hurt in that game or did he get hurt the week before? Now I can't recall.
I think it was the week before, if I'm not mistaken.
In any event, I remember we were talking about it, and I was like, hey, I think they're going to try to get Lad McConkey going, right? Like he had been injured, and then he had been playing but not really involved. And against Vandy, they didn't really need to do too much in the passing game, but he still ended up with 4 catches for 58 yards, didn't score anything. So very, very ho-hum game for Lad McConkey. And he's not priced down by any means. He's at 5.8. But I think that there's another opportunity where, this will be probably a more competitive game for longer. Big rivalry game, obviously. Both him and Dom Lovett at 5.7. I know Robert Thomas is kind of your shout, and there's obviously an opportunity for him too. But I think, one of the two of McConkey and Lovett, and they couldn't be priced closer. McConkey at 5.8, Lovett at 5.7. One of those two is going to have a huge game in this one. I'm kind of going to lean McConkey, just because we have not seen him be the featured guy the way that he has been in years past. Next to Bowers, and in this case, kind of more in place of Bowers, as kind of an alpha receiver. And Dom Lovett, we've only really seen him do that once, whereas McConkey, we've seen him do that, several times over several seasons. So I think we see probably something like 6.90-1 from McConkey, which gets the job done at 5.8. It's interesting enough. Guy I'm really interested in. You may recall a fairly impressive performance by a Kentucky back against Florida from a few weeks back, where Ray Davis just went absolutely bonkers with that offensive line that they have over there in Kentucky. And Georgia obviously is an even better and even more dominant offensive line that will be bulldozing holes for Dan Edwards. And he's 7.3. He's definitely not cheap. You got to find a place to save some salary in other spots, but I think we've done a pretty good job of figuring out ways to do that. And with Edwards at 7,300, I think he's got 200-yard and 2-touchdown upside in this one. And I don't think that he's going to garner a whole lot of ownership. I mean, people see Georgia games and they're, okay, points are going to get all spread out, and they will. But he's the only back with multiple 20 carry games for Georgia. I don't think we see, especially in a rivalry game, I don't think we see a whole lot of them mixing up the backs. And he, even with a healthy healthy Milton, I don't know that we're going to see him pilfer too much at this point in the season. I think it's kind of Edwards' backfield. So I think that is, along with Brooks, especially because it's a more competitive game, is right in that price range. I really like him as a running back, but pretty much just him and McConkey and or Lovett is probably my exposure. Thomas and Rosary Jackson, kind of very much alt build type options. You do get a little bit of a discount, not enough to warrant it, I don't think. And then on the Florida side, I mean, Ricky Pearsall, he shouldn't be as good. He's got Graham Mertz throwing to him. He's facing Georgia, but he's coming off of a 10-1, 66-1 game. Like, yes, granted, against South Carolina, and we just talked about how they're traditionally kind of a pass funnel, and that was a very high-scoring pinball, back and forth, 41-39 result. I don't think we're going to see that high-scoring of a game against Georgia. Certainly not on the Florida side. I would be very surprised if Florida puts up near 40 points against Georgia. But Ricky Pearsall has been pretty matchup proof. Hasn't had a lot in the way of tough matchups, but he did put up 8 for 92 against Utah, and they're no slouch defensively, and had a decent game against Kentucky, 362 in a score, and they're a pretty good defensive team. So at 7-1, I don't think anybody in the world is going to be on Ricky Pearsall, but I could see him. Let's say you want to get multiple Georgia guys in a lineup, maybe throw Carson Beck in there too if you really want to get crazy with that build. And you'd have to come back with somebody on Florida. I would probably come back with Ricky Pearsall over anybody in the running game. I don't think I'm touching a running back against the Georgia defense at any point this season.
100%. I think that that would be pretty negligent for sure. I like your McConkey call. I think Lovett stepping up. Still like Ra Thomas a little bit, but not cheap enough at 5-1. So if I'm not going Edwards in this game, like you mentioned, I just don't think that I'll have too much of it. And I would like to take advantage of Bowers not being around, but there's too many other spots that I'm interested in. All right, Pittsburgh versus Notre Dame. Notre Dame 20.5-point favorites, a 45 total. Starting with the Pittsburgh side, the jerk stories had some definitive struggles down there at 4-9, just hasn't worked out. Now, people probably won't remember, but there was this kid on Penn State, Christian Valu, who I really liked and wanted to get the starting gig there. Didn't work out. Comes to Pittsburgh where he's backing up, the jerk store, and suddenly he finds himself in a starting position, and he didn't do too well, or didn't do bad against Wake Forest. 45 pass attempts against Wake Forest, 302 yards, 2 touchdowns, 24 fantasy points, sitting there at 5-2. Definitely going to have some volume. The problem is he's playing this just ridiculous Notre Dame defense that I can't justify playing a quarterback against them right now at any price. If I have a throwaway GPP lineup, sure, I'll speculate, but I wouldn't play Ohio State guys against Notre Dame. So why am I going to play Christian Valu against them? I will say there's an intrigue here with Sibo Flemister at 4-4, getting the shot to come back to the team that he was originally a part of in 2018 in their recruiting class. Jerkovich also ended up being part of that recruiting class too, ironically enough. Rodney Hammond, who slated to be the starter this year and had the majority of the carries early on, has really lost the job to Sibo Flemister. When you look at the snaps for last week, Flemister went from 52% up to 81%. Hammond went from 47 to 19. So Flemister's having the career year that, Notre Dame probably thought the type of performance he's having now is what they would see. Rushed for 105 yards against Wake on 23 attempts, 13 carries the week before that, 10 the week before that. So his carries are just going up and up and up. Like I said, not the best spot. Had he had another matchup that we could take advantage of, just, throwing it out there like a UCF type of team, this would be a main team caliber play at 4-4. But it's going to be very hard to justify. You mentioned we have found some value on this slate. The last couple of slates, there's been some pretty tight pricing. Value wasn't as obvious. There are plenty of cheap guys that we can utilize here this week to fit others. We don't have to go down to Flemister, but it is kind of an intriguing type of setup there in soap opera. Receivers-wise, Bub Means sitting there at 4-8, had a real nice game, 9 catches for 109 yards and a score. It's his third straight game scoring a touchdown. Very streaky type of receiver in the past as well. He'll go long stretches without doing much at all, and then suddenly looks like the best receiver on the planet. I still favor Kanata Mumfield. He's really been my guy. I follow him. Really consistent receiver, but again, going up against Notre Dame, there's just not a lot here that I can utilize. On the Notre Dame side, it's just so weird to have Sam Hartman around and just not really have to use him. Totally different role than he had at Wake Forest. He did have 38 pass attempts against Louisville a couple weeks back in a game that they struggled in. 30 the week before that in a game they gutted out against Duke, but still with the 38 attempts, he barely scored double-digit fantasy points. So really hard to utilize Sam Hartman in any capacity, and it does make it hard to use any of their receivers or tight ends as well. Greathouse, his snaps went way up last game for some reason, but then you look at what he did, he was targeted just once. So you can't use these guys at all. The only guy in this game that I would have any real interest in, and I'm certainly considering it because we have these values that we've talked about, is Audric Estime. He's 7-8, very high price, but we know there's going to be a ton of volume there for him. Another 22 carries against USC. Didn't go over the 100-yard mark, which was surprising, but still 23 fantasy points because he scored twice. We know he has that touchdown equity. Anytime they're in the red zone or even the goal line area, it's usually going to be Audric who gets that, not sharing too much of the workload with anyone else. Now we know that, Jabrian Payne kind of, some spot up duty there at times in the end of the game. He's getting some receptions, but there's just nobody taking the workload away from Audric, and it would be an injury or something really, really bad for him not to get 25 plus touches in this game and to perform, really at a high level. Looking at it, I think there's going to be a situation where people maybe get a little cute and say, I can get that score for a lot less, or this opportunity cost is too high. I'm not going to use him. And I do think he's going to be really, really low owned. And I do think he's going to pay off this price and be one of the highest scoring players at his position this week. So ordinarily it might be hard to get to this price, but with the value that we have, I think it's going to be relatively easy. There are a lot of attractive running backs this week. You already mentioned, Brooks, Edwards. There's a couple of guys in the Utah-Oregon game that we're going to want to talk about, and there's just a lot of different options. This is shaping up to be a 4 running back week for me, and the idea of playing Audric Estime at sub 5% ownership against a Pitt team that he can run wild on certainly intrigues me to the point that I'm kind of penciling him in as a main team, plant my flag and roll with him in majority of the lineups even at this point. So hopefully it doesn't backfire on me, but at least I know he's going to get the touches if nothing else. So it's kind of weird seeing Hartman not be a fantasy viable option, but is there anybody in this game that you feel passionately about, or do you want to move on to the next one?
Not passionately, but Estime is just so good, and gets in most scenarios gets enough volume and is efficient enough that he's hard to ignore. But there's seems like there's more explosiveness from some of the other guys, Edwards and Brooks. But he's they really like him and they give him a lot of touches. So hard to get away from him if you like him.
Definitely. All right, moving on. We got the last 2 games here. USC versus Cal, 66.5 total. 10.5 point favorites are the Trojans. The defense that was talked about coming into the season, they're so improved, they're going to be so good, has not. And they have just been giving up a ton of points. And Caleb Williams, his mobility has betrayed him a little bit, and he's falling quickly out of the Heisman race. What are we doing with this, your USC boys, and how much Cal are we using against them at this point?
So we talked about this a little bit earlier in the week. I am very much in on Fernando Mendoza, and we probably don't need a $5,800 quarterback, but he's a $5,800 quarterback going up against the worst defense in the history of defense, and that defense also has an extremely explosive offense, to pair with it. And like people forget, yes, USC has lost the last 2 weeks, and the offense played terribly against Notre Dame and didn't keep up. They actually played pretty well against Utah, right? Like the offense was clicking, points were scored, they were spread out, so it was not necessarily the best game from a DFS perspective if you're like trying to pick the whack-a-mole that is USC wide receivers, but they were scoring points and they were effective, and that was against Utah. This is Cal. Like Cal's not much better if they are better than USC. And like what is the total? It was 60 something, right?
66.5 on DK.
Yeah, 66.5. Like, yes, that's a reasonable assessment. That's also an extremely high total in the context of this slate. And this is going to be a competitive game that's got an offensive focus. Man, I want every piece of this game I can get. Obviously, I want Caleb. Obviously, we are going to have a Trojans receiver do well if Caleb does well. Every week, I've kind of hoped it's been Zachariah Branch week, and like the first 2 weeks, we were right on that. He had some involvement against Arizona State, and then got hurt, and then didn't really come back with a lot of volume against Notre Dame or against Utah. They did get him on an end around and got him involved near the goal line. I really like to see that. I would have liked to see him catch more than one pass, but that's against Utah. This is Cal. I think there will be a concerted effort to get Zachariah Branch not just touches around the goal line, but get him, in space. And there was against Notre Dame. Notre Dame just played a really good game defensively, but they were trying to throw to him a good amount in that game. And we saw a lot of him on the field. I think there's a really good chance that he is going to have an explosive performance at very limited ownership in this one against Cal. More recently, it's been Taj Washington. Obviously, he had the best game against Utah of anyone. Previous to the last 2 weeks, it had been like, oh, well, maybe Brendan Rice is ascending to the alpha position after having mega games against Arizona State and Colorado, and then showing up decent against Arizona, but then not really showing up at all against Notre Dame and Utah. And the trouble with these guys, when we got 5 guys between 5'7" and 6'9", all of whom, except for Mario Williams, really, I don't really see him doing much, but Dorian Singer's, very talented and could have a big day. All of whom could go off, but Branch is the cheapest of the 5, and probably is the most explosive of the 5, and against a defense that doesn't really have the ability to contain an athlete like that. And I think we could see him and Caleb get on the same page quite a bit in this one. I don't want to shy away from Marshawn Lloyd. I mean, he's been more or less the bell cow, if you want to call it that. Fewer touches in the last couple games because those have been games they've either been trailing or have been more of a pass focus and back and forth battle. But I think we can see USC win at the line of scrimmage quite a bit against Cal when they're on offense anyway. And I think we could see a little bit more volume and a little bit more success from Marshawn Lloyd. His prices dipped down to 6.9, so we get a bit of a discount on him from what we've seen. I think this is his first time under 7,000 all year. So don't forget about him when we're mixing in running backs in that 7K range. And yeah, I think we've seen the end zone be kind of elusive for him as well. Better lately, but at the beginning of the year, he wasn't scoring much and he doesn't have any multiple touchdown games. So he has been kind of getting by on that single touchdown to come up with a decent fantasy score. But if we get over 100 yards and we get, at least that score, or if not that too, big day for Marshawn Lloyd, right? And you can do just about anything about the against this Cal offense. And then on the other side, Fernando Mendoza, man, nobody really knows about him because nobody really follows Cal, and he's a pretty talented guy. They're very high on him. He does have some rushing upside, and we haven't seen the full extent of his capabilities. We've seen him, play pretty well against Oregon State, get hurt, against Utah, and not really finish out that game. So, and also as a game they were losing by quite a bit, but he is in line to start for this one. I don't know how you can't jam him in at 5,800. Rushing upside against a defense that allows a ton of points is just a guy I want every piece of. So I don't know that he's my number one quarterback on the week, but he's definitely going to be in the rotation, especially in lineups that are very highly USC concentrated, which I think there'll be a good amount of that. I'm definitely not fading Caleb after he's had 2 pretty tough defenses against Notre Dame and then Utah, and then he gets Cal a chance to eat and show up like he was at the beginning of the season once again.
Yeah, definitely. This is a great get right spot for him. It's just, man, the 10.5 price, it's tough. I think people are going to have a little sour taste in their mouth, and it makes him a fantastic overall large field GPP play because, yeah, we know we can put up 40 plus. Like the call out there on Lloyd, efficient. Be nice if he got, more touches there. And then as far as the USC receivers go, man, they're still priced up, but I like the Branch call. I wish Deuce Robinson would get more snaps. He's playing like 7% of the snaps. I've been following that. But there's just too many mouths to feed on this team right now. But I really, really like that kid and looking forward to seeing him more in the future. Interesting. This is something that I'm kind of proud. We kind of saw this coming with Dorian Singer. He was really priced up high. It's like, yeah, he's not in the Arizona situation. There's just all these other options. So look out. And he was super chalky the first 2 weeks, but I think people have kind of discovered that, yeah, he's not getting as many looks, but the 5.9 price tag definitely has some built-in upside for him as well. Like the Cal side, Jeremiah Hunter, I think that's where a lot of people would go, right? But looking at the last Cal game, let me pull that up here. Taj Davis, formerly of the Huskies, had 11 targets in that game, 7 catches, 93 yards, and a touchdown. Some nice upside there. It was a struggle for Hunter. This will be likely a bounce back spot for him, but Davis coming in there at only 4.9.
I don't mind if you're crazy enough to use a pairing option with Mendoza. I don't mind Taj Davis at all.
Yeah, he'd be the one I think I would lean towards, even if you're not using Mendoza. That would be my guy. All right, last game on the slate here, Oregon versus Utah. This is a 47.5 total. Oregon comes in as 6.5-point favorites, and arguably the two most exciting players in the game play the running back position, but they're playing each other, and defensively, Utah gives up less than 90 rushing yards per game typically, and Oregon gives up under 110 rushing yards per game typically. So really bad matchup on paper, which should at least keep the ownership on Bucky Irving down a lot. Sitting there at 7.6, it's definitely a high price. And, typically a guy coming off a 31 fantasy point performance follows that up with a 42 is not going to be lower owned. But I think people are going to see that matchup in total and kind of shy away. The nice thing about Bucky is he's so involved in the passing game, and his touchdown equity is so high. And dare I say, he's probably even considered matchup proof at this time. I know Utah's defense is tough, but Irving is a really nice look. I might shy away from him as well in like a main team setting, but if we're thinking under 15% ownership for this guy after what he's been doing, I absolutely want to jam him into a bunch of large field GPP lineups. And as far as the rest of it goes, Bo Nix, 9.8 for Bo Nix, still not cheap enough. He's been fine. He's still churning out these 25 to 29 fantasy point games, but the opportunity cost is just too high for me there. I ended up having, because of Sawchuck, the salary to go up and play Troy Franklin. A little bit of a letdown for him last week. I do think they'll, get back to peppering him heavily. The emergence of Tez Johnson lately has really led to a little bit of a decline there in that last game, but he's a nice little option at 6.4 as well if you want to, kind of pepper in a Oregon Utah stack, because I do think this one has the potential to be a little higher scoring than people think, and I certainly don't think it's going to be like a 14-10 type of game either. On the Utah side, the wide receivers that, without Brant Kuthi, it's been kind of like, I don't really care to use any of these guys. Money Parks is there, Devon Bailey. The Mikey Matthews kid 2 weeks ago against Cal looked really good. The coach speak, if you will, that we had talked about earlier, we're going to get this guy a lot more work. He ended up with 1 catch for 8 yards against USC. That was a phenomenal failure. Just kind of proves and reminds us that Utah receivers, they're really not that trustworthy right now. But there is a kid on Utah that, as a safety, has coming in and doing a little Travis Hunter impression, playing some running back, playing some wide receiver. In that Cal game, 15 carries for 158 yards, 2 touchdowns, had a reception. Against USC, 9 carries for 68 yards, but then the 5 catches, 149 yards, 2 touchdowns as a receiver. And it was him, not Mikey Matthews, that took advantage of that USC defense. It's also caused him to play less on the defensive side as a safety. And I think we're going to continue to see Vacchi play this, kind of versatile offensive ATH weapon type, where they're just going to line him up all over the place, give him carries, give him receptions, just put him in a position to produce. And at 5K, I know the matchup stinks, but I don't know how we can't just continue to play a guy who is suddenly just, lighting the world on fire. And granted, Cal and USC defense is a lot different than Oregon, but it's not as if Oregon is some juggernaut of a defense. I do feel like their on-paper defense is a lot better than in-game, and Utah's offense is not the Washington Huskies offense. So I want to preface it there first, but their defense was getting pelted by the Huskies all game long, and it does show that against better than mediocre competition, meaning they have a pulse even, the defense is beatable. And I think Vacchi is just, either going to game plan for him, sure, but Jesus, this kid at 5K feels like such a fantastic play. And it's just another running back in this group of, 5, 6, 7 options that I'm really excited about. There is a merit to running Jaquin Jackson as well. 22 carries against Cal, 26 against USC. So he's still getting heavy volume, and they're really just going to use Sion and Jackson a lot, and everybody else be damned. No Brant Kuthi. They're going to, the receivers, Money Parks and those guys, they're going to be around. They're going to get, 1 to 3 targets. But I think Jackson and Vacchi are just going to be the guys getting all the usage at this point. And obviously Utah quarterbacks, Bryson Barnes, he did put up 32 fantasy points against USC. So your Mendoza call there, it's certainly warranted. But I don't see him putting up that kind of score here against Oregon this time. I see a lot of rushing and short yardage type of situations in place for both Jackson and Vacchi. So at 5K, I'm in on him. It's definitely going to feel like a chase. But, I mean, looking at that game, I went back and watched both the Utah games on stream just to see what was going on. And, man, this guy is electric. I don't know where they were hiding him on defense there, why they didn't play him sooner, knowing that 90% of their offense is injured, but this kid is fun. And I think he's going to give Oregon a lot of problems. So hopefully people get a little cute there and decide to fade him in droves. But at 5K, I'm certainly plugging him in and walking away. The main one for me that I'm going to have to really hem and haw about is Bucky Irving, because I do think he's at this point matchup proof. And I just would feel real bad about fading him fully and watching him put up another 40 again, even if it is against Utah. So do you have an opinion on the safety turned running back turned offensive superstar at this point?
It's really tempting to use him at 5K. It's a tough matchup, but it's by no means a necessary fade. There's just, I like a lot of running backs on this slate, and like you said, could end up being a 4 running back slate, and if that's the case, it'd be really hard to get away from him being in the rotation.
Yeah. All right, so that is the slate for DraftKings. Now we're going to talk about core, and then we're gonna get into PrizePicks, and then I'm going to give a FanDuel player pool, and then we'll end it here with some props and your player stat line. What is the core looking like for you at this moment? On DraftKings, obviously news could change things, but where are you at right now?
So I think we're looking at Caleb at quarterback. Justin Johnson at 3,900 at running back, and Nick Anderson at 5,800 at receiver.
Definitive, love it. So for me, I'm on the Garrett Green play. I really love this spot for him, and I feel like maybe people just aren't going to be on him. So he's my number one quarterback at this moment in time. Running backs wise, there are a lot of them to definitely like. I think I will be kind of chalky here and say Jonathan Brooks. I just feel pretty confident just rolling him out there. But Audric Estime is also going to be really high on my list. I just didn't want to give the highest price running back. And then at receiver, it's going to be either the Kansas State kid, Chase Brown, or Trey Knox, depending on where that news falls. I just feel very, very good about Trey Knox volume, especially if Leggett's out. So a little bit crazy there for me on DraftKings, mixed with some chalkier plays. The FanDuel, get into this and we'll do PrizePicks. The FanDuel player pool, they've got the extended slate, the all-day slate. Drake May versus Georgia Tech, the number one quarterback on FanDuel for me. He's going to bounce back in a big way against this Tech team. Max Johnson, really cheap. Malik Murphy's really cheap as well if you want to go that route for Texas. Garrett Green, of course. And then Ethan Garber's there for UCLA. Just about 9, in the mid 9K range there. I think great matchup. Garbers definitely needs to be considered. Running backs, Carson Steele, same thing for UCLA. RJ Harvey was pretty cheap over there. Ollie Gordon as a heat check. Ray Davis, your guy, under 10K. Jonathan Brooks and Bucky Irving. And they also have Sion Vacchi there for really cheap. Wide receivers, the Cal guys, Jeremiah Hunter especially on FanDuel, UNC, Tez Walker. They priced him up to 10K now, but I don't even know if we can get away from him. He's been so good. If you want a North Carolina cheapie there on FanDuel, 5.7K, Nate McCollum. And then the UCF wide receivers, as usual, completely cheap on FanDuel, totally underpriced. And then we get a very cheap Isaac Rex under 6K there on FanDuel. So that is my FanDuel player pool. As far as the core goes, Drake May, Carson Steele, and Tez Walker. Expensive, and then a little bit of a cheapie there. All right, let's get into the PrizePicks here. I'm just going to fire off the two that I'm really high on. Garrett Green over 280.5 passing plus rushing yards. I love that combo yardage for these mobile quarterbacks. And then I really like they killed the Bucky Irving prop like way down than what it should be. 112.5 rushing plus receiving yards. Yes, it's a tougher matchup, but Bucky Irving gets 100 yards pretty consistently. That just seems way too low. So those are my two. What are you looking at?
Interesting. I'm gonna go with an under out of the gate. We don't always do that, but because I'm so high on Justin Johnson getting the volume, I'm gonna go with CJ Donaldson under 54.5 rushing yards. And so we're going to bet that it is Johnson that gets the bulk of the carries. And then I will stick with the rushing yards category. We're going to go Lev Moss over 79.5. Think he actually breaks the century mark in this one. Saw Garrett Trader get the high volume and high efficiency work last week, so I think we see a similar scenario there with Lev Moss. Going to also go to the trustworthy receptions tab. We're going to go with Taj Davis over 4.5 receptions. He'll probably be involved, and that's going to be a pretty high volume offensive game just overall. And then for the any type of touchdown category, we're going to go Dylan Gabriel or over 2.5 pass plus rush plus receiving touchdowns. So I think Dylan Gabriel throwing for 3 of them and maybe running for 1 is a reasonable expectation.
Love it. All right, so moving on, I have some prop bets, and then we'll get the player pick from you, and we'll head out. First one, Drake May over 290.5 passing yards. That all these are going to be over on DraftKings minus 115. They're going to be, taking that loss. That was tough for them. I think they're just going to absolutely hammer the Yellow Jackets, and May's liable to throw for 400 yards. Garrett Green over 66.5 rushing yards. I'm married to the Green play. What can I say? And then Audric Estime over 95.5 rushing yards. That's minus 105, so a little bit of value there. I feel like 100-plus yards is an inevitability there for him. And then they do have Javon Baker at 71.5 receiving yards. I do like the over there, but I feel like Kobe Hudson over 37.5 receiving yards. That's a pretty strong play. I know Baker's been the guy, but Hudson, he's definitely shown the capability in the past as well. Anything over 40 will be a win for us there. I feel confident in that one, so I will take that. And then we got to go with the Jace Brown anytime touchdown plus 180. Give my young man the ball, please. All right, that will just about do it. We're going to wrap things up with this week's Jake Kuchek pick and stat line for Slate Breaker of the Day. Go ahead.
We are going to go, and it's actually not going to be Justin Johnson. I'm very high on him, but we've had enough of him. We're going to go with Fernando Mendoza for 250 passing yards, 67 rushing yards, and 4 total touchdowns.
Dang, that would be amazing. And he might do it. I like that call a lot. All right. Appreciate everybody who tuned in live tonight and continues to support the show on demand with the likes, comments, and the support. We'll be back Saturday morning, 1 hour before lock for the pre-lock show. There was a ton of stuff going on last week. So much news breaking. Very, very important time. Make sure you don't miss that. Also, college basketball continues with the preview shows next Sunday, and then the season will be here November 6th. Lots of fun stuff happening. Thank you, Jake, for helping me out yet again. Lots of good stuff. See you guys next week, same time, same place. Lots of green screens. Let's go.